Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining. I'm Natsuko Nicholls, Research Manager from IRIS. Here's the webinar overview. I will first talk about IRIS and IRIS-UMETRICS dataset, and then Joe will introduce you to the census data products to which the IRIS-UMETRICS dataset can be linked. We take questions once we finish our presentation, as Dan noted. So let me start with a quick introduction of IRIS, particularly for those who are new to our webinar series. IRIS is a national consortium of research universities collecting, improving, and distributing administrative data on the direct cost expenditures of research in order to understand, explain, and improve the public value of research and higher education. IRIS exists for and within the research ecosystem. IRIS is a successor of the Umetrix initiative, originally created to track American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, ARRA spending. As shown here, IRIS member universities play an important role for data availability, infrastructure support, and contribute to governance. A significant portion of our time and effort goes into advancing data security and improving quality towards report production, tool development, and research data releases. Today's webinar relates to the IRIS data release and research access, and IRIS's partnership with the Census Bureau and access to restricted use microdata from a variety of statistical agencies. The data we collect, integrate, and expand are primarily administrative data, originally collected for the purposes of transaction and record keeping, often associated with employment and delivery of service, and derived from a wide range of administrative systems. We handle large and complex data that needs to be stored in relational databases. The current release dataset includes 29 relational tables stored in one of many SQL servers at IRIS. The access to the IRIS data is given to qualified researchers from any discipline around the world and program evaluators from member universities within the secure virtual data enclave. The IRIS data are all about the research ecosystem, where we can identify groups or teams, activities, interactions, monetary flow, or other links while addressing the questions of impact of research. In particular, IRIS data are useful for analyzing the social and economic effects of research investment, the scientific production function, the career outcomes and earnings of doctoral students and trainees, as well as questions pertaining to science and engineering workforce and the STEM pipeline, among many other possible topics. Since the first data release in 2017, over 360 users have accessed our dataset. Here's a sample of work using our data. Some researchers focus on students who are paid on grants in order to examine the impact of their research experience on career path. Others look into type sources and/or scarcity of funding in explaining particular grant-seeking behavior and research innovation. We witnessed an increased interest from research communities in a team science or network science, utilizing the individual level record linkage work available in the 4th and 5th releases. If you're interested in a list of publications and working papers using our data, a bibliography is available from our website. Well, now let me walk you through the newly released dataset. As I highlight new and improved features that may be of use to both existing and new researchers, I also shed light on what we do behind the scenes in preparing the release, including de-identifying the data for research use. Since 2015, IRIS has grown in membership and in the amount of data. We've built and organized the current data set with 29 files in the 3 collections: core, auxiliary, and a linkage. Transactional data elements and structure in the core collection are the closest to what we receive from IRIS member universities. Without member universities' data submission to IRIS, the foundation of our research dataset would not exist. In the process of transforming the administrative data into the invaluable research asset and resources, IRIS builds most of these files in aux and linkage collections. Data growth is clearly shown in the coverage, which still varies by university, as you see. However, the average coverage is now up to 9 years, which is almost 3 times longer than that of the first release. And this is another way of showing the growth in aggregate counts and dollar amounts in comparison to previously released dataset. We're onward and forward and upward. Over the last 5 years, overall data quality has dramatically improved, largely thanks to researchers who address data issues and the data production team at IRIS. The data team works closely with university data providers for every submission. For research data, we also value the importance of generalizability. We've continued to map university submitted information about a campus organization unit where a given award is administered, mapping to a more standard unit name. In the current release, we have 19 categories as shown on the left side. And this is the results of information collection and research by student research assistant and consultation with faculty members at IRIS. What I show here on the right-hand side are some examples of how we map raw data to cleaned, standardized categories. Similar effort is directed towards cleaning and disambiguating funders' names. Funder sources range from federal and private agency to corporate foundations. Here are some examples of how we map the unprocessed funding source name informations to cleaned, standardized names. We also worked on cleaning and disambiguating names of private funding agencies, nonprofit and corporate foundations. Once entity names are cleaned and standardized, we're able to produce more accurate distribution of research award by funding type and source. This stacked graph shows a distribution of all awards by type of funding. There are over 530,000 awards in the current data set, and 61% of them are identified as federal awards or subawards originated from federal prime award. This is a list of top funding agencies. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, HHS, includes the National Institute of Health, NIH, one of the largest federal funder to many research universities. Here are top funding foundations. In our data set, award information holds a key that bridges between funders, recipients, award administering units, research teams, and collaborators within the team. This year, we expanded award linkage to 6 major agencies using 13 data sources. Linkage was done at both award and PI levels. We were able to identify over 270,000 employees from our dataset as a principal investigator, PI, of one or multiple grants from these agencies. This shows match rate and the proportion of PI identified awards from the IRIS-UMETRICS data. Well, as you see, you probably wonder why must some agency have relatively low match rates? Well, we continue to encounter with some challenges, although we've been improving our record linkage algorithm and results. So I show you why we continue to face challenges. So here's one. Identification of linking data element. So each agency has different variable name and worse, different formatting. So we first need to identify which is the linking data element so that we can continue linkage. Another challenge is noise. So we receive all sorts of data from member universities, and some comes with noise. But there is an issue about overcleaning, and then we have to clearly identify which part is noise, and then we proceed linkage, applying regular expression in Python. So I only selected out of 300,000 or even more matched to pairs. I only listed examples from each agency, 3 examples from each agency, but you can see the raw data and the unique award number from Umetrix. There is a punctuation, extra white space, and the ordering of numbers, and in the bracket, there are all sorts of noise that we have to deal with, and then eventually match to the standard unique federal agency assigned award ID. One of the challenges of working with administrative data is also to find common ground in definition and a standard practice across universities. In our data set, each employee who is paid on grants has a job title, ranging from a graduate student research assistant to data manager to scientist. The Occupational Classification project was initially launched at the Ohio State University, led by a co-PI of IRIS, Dr. Bruce Weinberg. When the project was transferred to IRIS last summer, we worked on refining classification with the focus on faculty ranking and appointment, mostly to meet increased needs and interests from the research community. This would help to differentiate junior faculty from senior faculty. For instance, when analyzing the impact of grants on career development of junior faculty. From the last release, we started including imputed demographic variables. Well, you probably wonder why we need to impute demographic variables. The data we receive from universities do not include true value of gender or ethnicity, race. This year, we started with the work of validation. With the actual gender information being provided from a given universities, we were able to validate our gender imputation work. Validation was pleasantly successful and produced 96 to 98% of individual gender correctly predicted, leading us to believe the validity of our existing method. For gender imputation, as before, we use a combination of ethnia and a Python gender guesser. Ethnia is the work originally developed by Dr. Veltorvik, who is at the University of Illinois at Chicago. After a validation test on ethnicity imputation, we sought for another method this time using the Python package called ethnicolor. With the previously used ethnia method, we included 4 different variables instead of just 1, so that researchers have options to choose from. And I show in this table that which data elements we used for imputations was gender and ethnicity or race. Using Python gender guesser and ethnia, we used first name for gender, and ethnic color using wiki data, we used both first and last names. And ethnic color method using a census data, or in ethnia, we used only last name for imputation. My final note on this year's highlight relates to topic modeling. With word crosswalks, researchers are able to extract more details about words. Most federal agencies collect abstract and make them publicly available. So how can we best utilize abstract text? Text analysis includes a number of different methods with strengths and weaknesses. In terms of limited resources and logical reasoning, human interpretations or frequency account may not be a recommended method when dealing with a large corpus of abstract. Using a word linkage results, we counted over 150,000 abstract that we could possibly use for topic modeling, through which we assign to each abstract a probability of belongings to a latent theme or topic. After repeated experiments, we adopted 200 topic model we run with 50 optimization passes. As always, we start with text processing, deduplication, cleaning, tokenization, stop word removal, revising the list of stop word, and then memoization. These two graphs demonstrate distribution of abstract by number of tokens. Without visualization, we would have never realized that NASA data have flaws, with a word title being recorded as abstract in most entries. So this is another problem dealing with administrative data. We get what we get from the federal agency, and we have to live with it. So there's holes, but with holes, we may have to sometimes remove from our samples. And in our case, we have to remove most of the NASA abstract from NASA because there are less than 150 tokens per abstract. We included two files based on topic modeling analysis in our data set in the current release. And here's our two different files and data structure. In general, our goal is always to make files, provide files that allows researchers to have a maximum range of options to choose from, not necessarily imposing them to use what we provide. So there is the link, sort of like a link between the agency, award ID, and then the abstract. And each abstract is assigned topic 1, topic 2, topic 3, and the probability is associated. And then topic 1, the highest probability, and then followed by a second topic, and then probability becomes lower and lower. And probably researchers would be interested in using a topic 1 or 2 with the highest or higher probabilities. However, we decided to give options going to like 20 topics. The other file is the topic and term relationship. So here's an example what I'd like to show you. So topic of 200 topics, this is a topic 109. And there are 20, 30 relevant terms associated with it. So if one of the award and its abstract and the topic number 1, which is the highest probability, is topic 109, one wants to know what sort of terms, so the keywords, are associated. In this case, plant, light, atom, smart, dark, and so on. So those two files researchers can use to associate a word and the work that they the research project that's associated through the abstract. Well, I could probably go on and on with more updates, but I should stop here. And I would like to encourage all of you to consider accessing and using our data if you are not the existing data users. So before I hand it over to Joe, let me quickly explain how we share the restricted access data. Data access requests start with the online application available from our website. We ask you to tell us about you, your collaborators, if any, and the goals and expected outcomes of your project. Another important element is the restrictive data use agreement. RDUA is an institutional agreement that needs to be signed by institutional official at your institution and at the University of Michigan. The need for RDUA makes the process formal and time-consuming. However, this is important because we promise our member universities, our data providers, that we will protect the privacy and confidentiality of the individuals represented within the dataset, as well as the identity of the institutions themselves to the greatest extent possible. Is there any fee involved for data access? Well, yes and no. If you're affiliated with one of our IRIS member universities, you don't have to worry about seat fees. If not, seat fees are charged annually. A final step is to view a short online tutorial video that covers the subject of data security and the rules when working in the secure virtual data enclave. At the end of the video, you will be asked to read and sign the IRIS Virtual Data Enclave Acceptable Use Policy. This concerns do and don'ts of working with our data. We have provided more details at our website, so please visit our website. And all the data release and documentation should be available by April 15 or mid-April. So we will follow up with you when everything is available. And the public-facing summary documentations and data dictionary, entity diagram, relational diagrams would be all available from website for you to download. Okay, that's all I have. And to Joe.
Thanks, Natsuko. A lot of really exciting things. All right, let me share my screen really quick. Okay, thanks to the IRIS team for having me here. I'm really excited to be here. My name is Joe Staudt, and I'm an economist at the Center for Economic Studies at the US Census Bureau. And today I'm going to be talking to you about something that I find really exciting, at least, and that is the linkages that are possible between Umetrix data and various census data products at the US Census Bureau. So broadly, you can think about two different linkages being possible. The first one is linking the employees from Umetrix data to person-level data at the Census Bureau. And the second is linking the vendors who supply these grants to business-level data at Census. And I'll go into a lot more detail, but before I do need to issue the following disclaimer. I will show you some results today that are based on confidential microdata at Census. They all have been reviewed to make sure that no one's confidentiality is compromised. And also, of course, I'm speaking for myself. Everything I say is from me and not the Bureau itself. So broadly, the talk is just going to be separated into two topics. So first, I'm just going to give a general overview of the types of linkages that can be made between Umetrix data and Census. Then, to give you some more concrete examples of what has been done, I'm going to give some examples of my own work. That's not to say that my work is the only work being done in this area. It's certainly not. Lots of people are doing really cool research linking Umetrix and Census data. It's just that I know my work best, and so I thought it would be a good way to illustrate the kinds of questions you can answer by linking Umetrix to Census data. So, as I mentioned, there are sort of two broad ways to link Umetrix data to Census data. And the first way is to link the employees from Umetrix to person level data at Census. And so if you're familiar with Umetrix at all, it includes all transactions made between the grant and all the employees of the grants. So all the payments made, you don't have the payment values, but you know that the transactions exist. And so you can take these employees and their personal information, the name and the age of the employees, and use a probabilistic match process within Census to assign what's called a protected identification key, or a PIC. You can sort of think of a PIC as a fake social security number. They do map one-to-one social security numbers. And once you've assigned a Umetrix employee to a PIC, sort of the world is your oyster within Census. You can link each person, each Umetrix employee, to a really broad variety of data within Census. And here are some examples that I've listed. So you could link Umetrix employees to what's called the Integrated Longitudinal Business Database, or the ILBD. This is going to be based on 1099 tax forms, which is basically going to capture self-employment. So you're going to be able to see which of the Umetrix PICs engage in any types of self-employment. You can also link Umetrix employees to various types of wage data at Census. So the LEHD program, or the Longitudinal Employer Household Dynamics program, is a program at Census that's a collaboration between the 50 states and Census, basically where the states give Census their unemployment insurance wage records. Census then organizes it into a usable file for research. And what this is going to give you is quarterly earnings data, and you're able to link the Umetrix PICs to this quarterly earnings data. An alternative source of earnings data are the W-2 tax records that we have at Census. So through agreements with IRS, we are able to use W-2 tax records for research purposes. And so between the LEHD employee history file and the W-2 tax records, you're basically able to characterize the entire employment history of each of these Umetrix individuals. In addition to earnings data, you can link the Umetrix individuals to demographic data. This can be done using the decennial census or the individual characteristics file, or ICF. So the ICF is part of the LEHD infrastructure, and you're going to get information like gender, ethnicity, race, date of birth, place of birth, that sort of information. It's based on a variety of information, but the main input to creating the individual characteristics file is the Social Security master file. So this is going to cover everyone in the United States, including people in Umetrix. So you're able to link Umetrix PICs to the ICF and get a lot of demographic information that way. So all the files that I've talked about so far are basically population or universe level files. But you could also link Umetrix individuals to various surveys that Census does. One that I have done myself and is a very famous survey is you can link Umetrix folks to the American Community Survey, or the ACS. The advantage of surveys, of course, is that you are going to be able to drill down in a lot more detail on each individual. So you'll be able to characterize, the type of household a person lives in or their educational history. The downside, of course, is since it's a survey, there are many Umetrix people that didn't take the survey and you won't be able to link to the surveys. So broadly, those are the employee links that can be made. But another cool feature is that once you've linked an employee to one of the wage data sources, the employee history file from the LEHD program or W-2 tax records, you can then link them to the businesses at which they work. So not only are you learning what their wages are, you're also learning the types of firms that they work at. So are they working at old firms or young firms, large firms or small firms? What industries are these firms in? And you can do this using the main thing is the longitudinal business database here at the bottom, the LBD. And this is the universe of all employer firms in the United States. So it's everyone. So you can really comprehensively characterize the types of firms that Umetrix employees work at. This is a schematic representation of what I've been talking. In the interest of time, I'm not going to dwell on this, but if you are interested in this, I can certainly send you my slides. I'm happy to do that. So that's the first type of linkage that can be made, individuals that are paid on Umetrix grants to person level data at Census. The second main type of links that can be made are linking vendors from Umetrix to business level data at Census. So Umetrix includes all transactions made between a grant and vendors. So if a grant purchases, say, a microscope. A vendor supplied that microscope to them, and that transaction is captured in Umetrix. And very usefully, the name and address of that vendor is included in Umetrix as well. Well, using that name and address information, we can link those vendors to what's called the business register at Census. And the business register is a list of all business establishments in the entire United States. Usefully, it also has the name and address information of every business establishment in the United States. So we have name and address information from the business register, name and address information from Umetric vendors. We can use a probabilistic match process to link the two. And once we've linked a Umetrix vendor to the business register, we have a unique identifier internal to Census that we're able to link to a variety of other cleaned up business data sources. And one of the main ones that at least I have used in the past is, again, the longitudinal business database. And this will allow you to get the age of vendors, the industries in which they operate, whether they're large or small firms, that sort of thing, where they're located in the United States. So you get a bunch of information. But there are a lot of other business data sources, including like the economic census and some others that you could also link these vendors to as well. Here's a schematic representation of the linkages made between Umetrix vendors and business data at the Bureau. Again, I'm not going to dwell on this in the interest of time. If you're interested, I'm happy to send you the slides. Okay, so that's the first sort of half of my talk, where I sort of give a general overview of the types of linkages that can be made from Umetrix to Census. So employees and vendors can both be linked to Census data. And now I'm going to give you a few examples of actual linkages that have been made for research purposes, and just to illustrate the types of questions that can be answered by making these linkages between these two great data sources. So the first one is a project that I'm working on faculty commercial engagement. So what I'm interested in here is how often the faculty in Umetrix engage in economic activities outside of their university. And so what I do is I link all Umetrix faculties using the occupation codes that Natsuko discussed earlier to their W-2 tax records, to the integrated longitudinal business database, which is going to measure self-employment, and then to the longitudinal business database, which is going to allow me to look at the types of firms that they work at, that they get a W-2 from. So are they getting W-2s from large firms, small firms, old firms, young firms, that sort of thing. And so what do I find? This is just the sort of the first graph in the paper. It goes into much more detail. If you're interested, let me know, of course. But what I find is this is just the fraction of faculty working in different firm types. So the way that I've defined my sample, a faculty member has to be receiving positive earnings from their university. So trivially, that first bar, the fraction of faculty receiving earnings is 1. What's not trivial is the second bar, which is the fraction of Umetrix faculty who receive earnings from outside their university, from non-academic sources. So about 43%, a pretty sizable minority of faculty, do engage in economic activity outside of their university. Now, if we keep going to the right, we find that 32% of Umetrix faculty engage in self-employment, and about half of that, 16%, receive a W-2 from an employer firm. We can then characterize the types of employer firms. So about 8% of Umetrix faculty receive a W-2 from a high-tech firm, about 9% from a low-tech firm, 14% from an incumbent firm. Incumbent here is defined as a firm that's 5 years or older, and only about 3% of Umetrix faculty receive earnings from a young or a startup firm, meaning a firm that's less than 5 years old. So that's one sort of thing that you can do by linking Umetrix individuals to census data that was not possible prior to these linkages being made. Not only can we look at participations, we can actually look at their earnings. So this is faculty earnings from different firm types. So the top row here is total wages. The typical faculty member in Umetrix earns about $150,000 a year. About $128,000 of that comes from their university, and about $22,000 or 15% comes from non-university sources. I've broken it down further here. I won't go into that, but what this is illustrating is that a sizable fraction, a minority, but about 15% of the typical faculty members' earnings comes from sources outside their university. So that's one project that I'm working on. A second is what's now called Science Interrupted. And so my co-authors and I look at this phenomenon whereby research grants are typically up for renewal and then are renewed immediately if they are renewed. And so there's a continuity of funding. There is no lapse in funding. But at the NIH, I'm sure other funders as well, but we focus on NIH, there's also a sizable minority of grants where the grant expires and instead of the funding continuing right away, there's a gap in when the funding is renewed. And so specifically, we look at gaps of about 30 days or longer. And what we want to know is, are these gaps, these temporary lapses in funding, leading to any longer term employment outcome for the people that work on those grants? And this is possible to look at when you link Umetrix employees, this time all employees, not just faculty, to census earnings records in the form of W-2 tax records. We're able to look at their employment outcomes before and after an interruption. And so that's what these two graphs are doing. Just very briefly, the right-hand side graphs are for employees that are in labs supported by multiple R01 grants. So there's going to be sort of a cushion effect here. You can just ignore those for now. Basically, there's no effect as long as you are in a lab that's supported by multiple R01 grants. You're sort of cushioned from the effects of an interruption. But the graphs on the left are for employees that are in labs supported by a single R01. And if that single R01 is interrupted, you can see from the top graph that your probability of being in academia drops substantially for a couple of years before recovering. So there's not permanent displacement effects from academia, but if you go down to panel B, you see that the probability of you appearing in our administrative data at all, so whether you get a W-2, you're in the LEHG, you have a 1099 tax record, the probability of we not finding you anywhere goes up by about 2.5 percentage points after an interruption. And so what's going on here? We think what's going on is that these interruptions are leading some fraction of Umetrix employees that are on the interrupted grant to leave the country. We don't find you anywhere in our data, which means likely that you are probably becoming employed elsewhere and leaving the US scientific workforce. So that's all I have. Any questions I'd love to answer, and thanks again for letting me pitch the links.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Natsuko. There's one question from Jenny Kwan. How are the Umetrix data linked with census data? Is there a numeric identifier that connects the data?
Yeah, so I should say really quick, I did forget to mention, if you are interested in accessing census, the census data and Umetrix within census, shoot me an email. I can put you in touch with the right people. But how is the linkage done? So it's done in two different ways. So when it's employees, we get information from IRIS on the names and dates of birth of the employees. And then we have this internal process at Census called a PBS process. And to be honest, we have so many acronyms at Census, I don't remember what PBS stands for. But what it does is it probabilistically assigns the picks that I was talking about to each Umetrix individual. And so once you've assigned a pick to Umetrix individual, it's just a numeric identifier that's common across all sources of census data. And so once a pick is assigned to a Umetrix employee, you're able to link them to almost any census data product. And then for businesses, we do a name and address fuzzy match. And then the result of that match process is a business identifier, an establishment identifier that you can use to link to other census data. So yeah, they are internal numeric identifiers within census.
So just to clarify, these are probabilistic matches.
They are in both cases. And I will say, I think it's safe to say that the employee matches, both are pretty good, but I think the employee matches are probably a little bit better than the business matches. But both are good.
Okay, here's another question from Jeff Alexander. For vendor transactions in Umetrix, how much information is available? Just the vendor name and funding award that paid for the transaction, or do we have details on what was purchased?
Not only vendor names and then vendor locations, but not the products or goods or services that was transferred between universities and vendors. But there is actually the field code object code. It's not really standardized, and that's still on the wish list to make it more standardized and map to, there is like a salary, there is also like in traveling, and it's not necessarily like a concrete information about what goods and services were, but there is a category like classifications, and universities have that. And depending on the quality of the data and object code, but certainly we started sort of cleaning up, and there's certain room that you can actually, get in and then extract informations, what sort of goods were purchased. And one of the researchers that actually looked into the object code was a focus on vendor transaction and impact of sort of the economy, recessions, and then looking at the type of the gas, like a natural gas, LP gas for the lab use. And he was able to actually use object code. But of course, it's somewhat limited.
So there are not any other questions at this point. I wanted to point out that I've put our website and email address in the chat. Here's another question from Young-Hee Lee. Can you identify what PhD degrees that STEM professors have based on majors such as electrical engineering, computer engineering, and so on?
That would be the existing and future project that IRIS has right now with NCSES, and they have SCD data and the survey of earned doctorate, and that's gonna be probably in a future product. And employees who have graduated from program from the IRIS member universities, and then we track these people and then link to SCD data, and SCD, NCSS and SCD tracks more like a longitudinal data collection for individuals who earned PhD and then continue career. So that's a wish list too.
Well, there are no other questions at this time.
Here's another one.
Here's
Yeah.
yeah.
Go ahead, Dan.
Could each of you talk about how well the data enables identification of 1, non-US sources of research funding, and 2, foreign affiliations and or collaborations? This is from Thomas Azio. Sorry for the pronunciation.
That's good and hard questions. We do see funders' names, like foundations also, from outside. And for example, like some of the agricultural related funding, there is a state level, but also on foreign governments, I've noticed. But it's not that consistent. So maybe that may be something that we will check with universities. We might be filtering some of the foreign originating funding informations, or maybe simply much less informations that we find in the Umetrix. A second, foreign affiliations. So maybe you're asking international collaboration. If that's the case, I think that goes beyond the Umetrix, but a group of researchers definitely working on like a bibliographic analysis sort of field and connecting individuals through publications. And then publications is definitely available publicly, and especially PubMed. And one of the faculty members at IRIS, Dr. Jinsuk Kim, has been working on it. And that's definitely the metadata from the PubMed, including a language of the articles and journals, but also affiliation. And there are definitely a lot of international collaboration. So that goes beyond our data set, but it certainly is variable, very invaluable research is going on. I hope I answered your question. Okay.
So, question from Marcela Gomez. What type of demographic information is predicted using ethnia?
Both gender and ethnicities. And ethnicity, I say in a kind of slash race because it's different categories, and ethnia is a more country ethnicity oriented kind of classifications.
And then another one from Jeff Alexander. Does IRIS data include information on any patents that result from?
We did link to USPTO patents view data in the past, and two times, and we are not including in this current one, but we will probably have patent linkage in very near future. We need to update that linkage as well. But we've done a PubMed, and that's coming actually as a supplementary release in late summer. And patent might be forthcoming in fall, but I will have to check and can't promise exact date or timing of the release. But yeah, we have done it, and actually a past release includes a patent Umetrix linkage.
We have about 10 minutes left of our allotted time. If anyone has any further questions. If not, I'll just mention again our website and email address in the chat. We will post a recording to our YouTube channel in the next couple of days. And again, I'd like to thank you all for coming. One more question here. So from Jenny Kwan, how will you link with patent data? It can't include the patents themselves because that would identify the individuals, right?
So we do use names and the assignee organization. So patent has also a really complicated relational tables, but basically assignee, organization, and inventor. So inventor ID is actually assigned to every single inventor. And USPTO has done a significant amount of work and a great work at disambiguating names. And they have a lot of people, of course, and then they have assigned, after disambiguating names, assigning unique inventor ID. So we do, all of us have access to PII, personally identifiable information. So we use that. And then also we use the filter of assignee organization mapping to IRIS member university. And then we link between our Umetrix generated unique identifier for the individuals and then also inventor ID. So people can definitely link back to patent assignee or organization ID or other patent related informations from the source file.
Next, we have a question from Zach Jacques. Is it true that we could see a record for a single anonymized individual's linked financial data versus an aggregate?
It is transactional, like a pay period, but we do not get actual amount. So the salary is very private information, and most universities don't want to share it. But we do have a proportion. So let's say I'm on the grant ABC and then get paid weekly, monthly, quarterly, for example. The pay period duration varies by universities. but that record is there, but it's all proportion. So if I'm paid by 20% by NSF grant, for example, that would be the proportion towards that grant. And then also we provide FTE from the university's informations. So with combination of the two or even one could know what kind of proportion of work has been put towards research, paid by research grant, a given research grant. But that's all, and not exactly how much I paid or one gets paid. But it's not just aggregate, one at the individual level. Oh yeah, so he's asking Joe. Okay.
So yes, that's correct. We link at the individual level. So the individual researchers or not always researchers, individual employees in Umetrix are assigned a PIC, the protected identification key, and using that individual level identifier, you can link them to their specific W-2 tax record. Yes, for the individual.
So it seems as though we have answered everyone's questions. Thank you all again for coming. And we will, like I said, post a video in a couple of days. And please get in touch with us if you have any other further questions. All right. Thanks, everyone.